Everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Hot routes once again here on a Monday night with my friend Manny Hill. And we have some news to react to in Viking land that I don't want to overstate it to say it could change lives. It could change fates. In fact, all I've been humming all day is we are the champions, my friends. Because, Manny, the addition of a guard will now equal, I don't want to say one championship, I want to say a dynasty for the Minnesota Vikings now that they have added a guard in week 3. So we've been calling for this, Manny, for a long time. Of course, I'm just messing around, but the Vikings signed Dalton Risner. Why it took so long? First comment in. Why didn't they sign him earlier? I don't have an answer for you. I don't know what the answer is. And even though I am kidding around, Jordan says, can he play guard? This time, yes. This time the answer is yes. They signed a player who can play guard. It is a significant move, Manny. It has been their biggest weakness for a long time. The guard play from both Ed Ingram and Ezra Cleveland has been pretty miserable. I also wouldn't leave out entirely the center position if there is a serious issue with Garrett Bradbury, because I believe Risner played some center when he was in college. But it's better than nothing. It's adding a guy that has a pretty solid career underneath his belt. People are going to ask tonight in the comments why he was still a free agent. I don't know. We're going to hear from him, I'm assuming, on Wednesday, and maybe he'll answer that question. But a move that I think the Vikings had to make because the offensive line was struggling so much, and they know if they can give Kirk Cousins time, they can pass the ball. And something that maybe is out of a little bit of desperation considering where they are. Your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, my immediate reaction is like I think a lot of other people is why now? Why why did you let yourself fall into an 0-2 hole before you made a move like this when he came in to visit during the preseason, and you had an opportunity to bring him in then and sign him and have him go through at least a little bit of a training camp with you, and then who knows if it would have made a difference. Certainly in the Tampa Bay game, he probably could have made a difference week 1. Philadelphia on Thursday, who knows if I think the Eagles are pretty significantly better than the Vikings, so maybe the Eagles still end up winning that game. But I mean, it could have been the difference in between you winning and losing that Tampa Bay game. You never know. I mean, so, but he's a good, solid player, as you mentioned. He can play a couple of different positions. He played some center in college, like you said. This is big for them. This is something we've been wanting them to do with that position for years. It feels like, even going back to, maybe even before Kirk Cousins signed with the team, but certainly. When Kirk came on board, that weakness in the interior of the offensive line has always just been a thorn in the Vikings side. And now they finally seem to have a guy in place that, if nothing else, is at least just competent at the position. I don't think he's going to be tripping Kirk Cousins at the beginning of a drop back. I don't think he's going to be knocking the ball out of Kirk's hands when he's trying to pull off to the left. Ed Ingram, I'm talking about you. So I mean, at least it seems to be a little bit more competence at the position, and hopefully he can stay healthy and just find some stability at that position. I think that's kind of, if there's a word to describe this, it feels like there's going to be a little bit more stability now on the interior of the offensive line.
So my assumption is that he will play right guard, because the right guard position through these first 2 games has been nothing short of tragic. And you mentioned the most notable strip sack by the guard, but also just even you go through and look at the grades from the first 2 weeks, and they are horrendous. And I know they've played 2 good defensive lines, but the Vikings don't stop playing good defensive lines except for those 2 games against the Chicago Bears. But there's a lot of good defensive lines that are on the way, including, Kansas City, that's going to come in week 5. Their defense with Chris Jones back in the mix is going to be beastly. You're going to play Atlanta, who has Grady Jarrett. You're going to, just through even teams that you don't think of as having, how about Carolina? Like, they look like awful on offense as we speak, but on defense, they don't. Like, they've got guys who could cause a lot of problems. So my assumption is that it is because of the right side of the line. But I don't think that Ezra Cleveland has been good by any means. So if they were to play him at left guard and surprise us, I guess I wouldn't be that shocked because, but when Kevin O'Connell was asked when he came in, Dalton Risner, for a visit, he did say, O'Connell said, like, yeah, we had a conversation about like what positions he'd be comfortable with, which to me is kind of the indicator of like, okay, they must have been talking about right guard, because if they were only talking about left guard, you wouldn't ask him what positions he was comfortable with playing. And I guess I can't leave the center situation out either, because Austin Schlottman over the last 2 weeks has had a very, very rough go of it. And again, playing Vita Vea, playing Jordan Davis, right? So that's another question. So not only, Manny, your opinion on where he plays, but also how much does this really impact the Minnesota Vikings?
Well, it could certainly help Kirk Cousins. We know that if Kirk is not playing in a clean pocket, he's just going to struggle. I mean, it is what he has been as a quarterback for a decade plus, as a starter. If you get pressure on him up the middle, he's just got no chance. There's just no way it's going to work. And let's be honest, these first two games, the Vikings haven't run the ball very well either. And, I don't know exactly how good of a run blocker Dalton Risner is compared to his pass blocking, but, I got to wonder if that's going to be an improvement too, because the Vikings just have not been able to run the football. And, if you can't run the football, it takes away some of the effectiveness of the play action pass. And we know Kirk is typically at his best in the play action game. That's when he's typically had the most success. So I think it's going to help the running game, certainly. And I think it's going to get them in a position where, if they have an injury, okay, if Risner plays at the right guard spot and something happens with Ezra Cleveland where he's injured, or if he just gets worse, maybe then, you have a guy that's a little bit more versatile that can slide over to that other spot. And then, maybe at that point you just put Ed Ingram back in right guard and you just pray. But I think the versatility that he has, I think will certainly help. And we'll see how he can help the running game as well.
Yeah, so looking at the PFF running grades for Reisner, they're not impressive. I mean, they kind of look pretty average or even a little below average, but the way that they've even just been working together has been so putrid on the offensive line. Even just like communicating with each other, being in the right place when you're trying to block. Kevin O'Connell mentioned numerous times that they haven't even been doing like the combination blocks correctly. So being a veteran player, having some success in the league, even if he's not a powerhouse and is running over people, just being in the right spot will actually be an upgrade. It kind of tells you how bad it's been. His forte is really in that passing game. And with Kevin O'Connell, what he's looking to do is throw the football all over the place. It's always going to be what Kevin O'Connell does. And when I was watching the tape back from the Philly game, I mean, I was super impressed by a lot of the ways that they threw the ball, not even just in garbage time, because we do know that some stats got pumped up there pretty good on that one last drive. I mean, they were playing back in the parking lot and Kirk's just hitting guy after guy. But through the rest of the game, when the score was fairly close, I mean, they were dialing up stuff that was getting Justin Jefferson open, TJ Hawkinson in the middle of the field, Jordan Addison, and a really, really clever concept, put three guys to the left, Jordan Addison alone on the right side. And I had O'Connell in the press conference kind of break down how that went, but you could see that the concept got the safety to rotate over toward TJ Hawkinson, and Jordan Addison just flew. Like, these are really good things for them. The weapons they have, the way they could throw the ball, but you can't have miscommunications all the time that are resulting in strip sacks. And you can't have just dudes blowing right through the line. So I think it does have an impact. But right now, just looking at how much Cousins has been pressured through 2 weeks, it's about 36% of dropbacks, which is not that different from where Kirk Cousins usually sits. So if you can even reduce that a couple of pressures per game because you have Dalton Risner instead of Ed Ingram, and you can communicate better as an offensive line and play a little bit, just a little bit more together, as opposed to just having several players who are pretty good, Darisaw, O'Neal, and I think when Bradbury's healthy, and then a lot of big question marks. Instead, you can at very least have that communication. They could play the way they're being asked to be played, because I feel like there's been a lot of hints, Manny, that they are not even playing the way that they're supposed to. It's like when they had Dakota Dozier or Tom Compton, those guys just
Yeah.
couldn't block, but at least they were in the right spots. I don't even think Ed Ingram's been in the right spots.
Yeah, it's been really bad. And certainly the hope going into this season was that Ed Ingram was going to take a leap. But it just hasn't happened. And in a lot of ways, he's just gotten worse. I mean, it's just it's been bad. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about just stability. You know, I think one of the things that we've seen during this Kirk Cousins era is that when something goes wrong, when it's, him getting tripped by Ed Ingram when he's dropping back, when, Akeem Hicks is blowing up the interior of the offensive line, when something goes wrong, it impacts this team in a different way. It's like the quarterback gets shell shocked and then they're just screwed for the rest of the night or the rest of the afternoon. And I think if you have a guy like Dalton Risner who's just kind of steady, he's not great, he's not Alan Faneca or anything like that, but if he's just stable and if they can avoid like the disastrous what the hell just happened type of plays, which was happening quite a bit with Ed Ingram, if they can avoid that, I think it will give them an opportunity to kind of do a lot of the things in the passing game that you were talking about, and be kind of a more consistent, high-powered offense and do a lot of the things that we saw them do on Thursday night. Because look, I know the defense was pretty solid against Tampa Bay. They weren't great on Thursday. They were not good against the run. So this team, if they're going to be competitive, if they're going to still win this division, they're going to have to put some points on the board. And so that's going to be an important thing going forward.
I mean, I think that they're going to play in a lot of games where the other team has a lot of points and you have to go back and forth with them and you've got to throw the football like crazy. I mean, I was joking around with Kevin Seifert today at TCO Performance Center that, like, how many weeks will it take Justin Jefferson to break Calvin Johnson's record? It's not whether he can, it's how many weeks it's going to take at this rate. I mean, this is Madden stuff, but I don't see anything slowing it down. For the record, when we talk about where he's going to play, and I mean, this doesn't always match up how PFF grades things and what the team does. But PFF is grading Ezra Cleveland as having in pass blocking 2 pretty good weeks, where Ed Ingram ranks 40th out of 54 guards. So there's a very clear gap between the two and how they performed in pass blocking, which is Risner's forte. I don't know if he's going to play this week. It's going to feel weird if he doesn't play this week and then they lose and then they're 0-3 and then they just signed a guy who's supposed to help them. But do you want help? I don't know. That's a weird situation. I think that he very well could play this week. I think that they've probably communicated with him a little bit about how they want things done in Minnesota, like giving him a playbook or something, or texting pictures of it, or whatever they might have done to make sure he knows. But I mean, I think someone who's played in the league like him can do it, as we saw from TJ Hawkinson last year, and that he could be a huge upgrade from what they've had. So if he plays well, it influences the most important element of the game, which is passing. And then the rest, we'll see how it goes. So let me ask you this, Manny. But if anybody has more Dalton Risner questions, I mean, you guys should be celebrating, right? Is that fireworks out in the streets? I hear a guard. Like your new July 4th is September 18th, when the Vikings actually spent to get a veteran guard who was good. So here's my question, though. So you got Vikings-Chargers, and I'm excited for this game. And one of the reasons I'm excited for this game is that these two franchises are absolutely bananas. They are the craziest, the weirdest. And think about this. So I've already seen this week that the Chargers are, I believe, the first team to have scored 50 points and had no turnovers and lost both the first 2 games. And the Vikings The Justin Jefferson fumble that really started things unraveling for the Vikings was only the eighth time in the last 5 years that that rule has even come into play. And people get upset about it every time, but it almost never happens. So the Vikings lose on stuff that almost never happens. The Chargers lose on stuff that almost never happens. Both of these franchises have missed field goals in the playoffs. Both of them have had really great teams year after year through their history and have come short. I can only imagine, only Roger Goodell and the script writers know what could happen this week. So I want to know from you, Manny, what's the weirdest thing that could happen between the Vikings and the Chargers on Sunday?
A tie. A tie. I mean, come on. It's two winless teams. It's two teams that feel like they probably, at least should have had, one win out of those first two games. It's two franchises that have been kicked in the shins, pun intended, by kickers in their team history. So I'm envisioning a game that ends in a tie, that both teams at one point in the game have a double-digit lead. So that happens, and then both kickers miss field goals in overtime, and we end up with a tie. Because when you think about the history between both franchises, I think that would be a fitting way for a game like that to end.
So in thinking about this, I was trying to rack deep in my brain, like what have I never seen before, or what would be like a super bizarre thing? And you know what popped in my head, Manny? Something that happened in the game Adrian Peterson set the record for rushing, and it was against the Chargers.
I know where
You
you're
know
going with this.
exactly what I'm going to say. That this game on Sunday will be decided by someone returning a short kick for a touchdown. That is what's going to happen. There will be a game-winning kick, or let's say tie game, fourth quarter. Vikings lineup. Here's Greg Joseph. He's ready to go. He's lining up the kick. He boots it. And here's a Chargers player back there. I don't know who. And he catches it. Austin Eckler is back there. He catches it. He dodges a couple Vikings. Oh, no, he shakes Jalen Naylor, and he's going. And he's going all the way. He's loose. And he goes all the way into the end zone. And the Chargers win on a walk-off short field goal. That is my guess of how this game will be lost. Manny, isn't it funny about how these teams have turned over players how many times over the years? And yet they still have the same identity. Like, do you believe in this? And we're going to talk about this a little later with some quarterbacks. But do you believe in this? Like in this, where a team or franchise can have an identity for some reason, no matter who plays for them, who coaches them, who the water boys are, what stadium they play in, what name they have. I don't know why, but it just seems to be that way with these two teams.
It does. And I can't explain it, because we've seen both of these teams have really good, championship contending teams, right? Like the Vikings in 98 having the greatest offense ever and having home field advantage. And it's just a sure bet that they're going to go to the Super Bowl. The Atlanta Falcons have no chance. And then Chris Chandler comes into the Metrodome and has the game of his life. I mean, the Chargers are 14-2, and they're hosting the Patriots in the divisional round. And like, this is great. Look at how great this young quarterback named Phillip Rivers is playing. We've got the best player in football, LaDainian Tomlinson. He's the MVP of the league. We're gonna, Brady's not even playing that well against us. He's throwing interceptions. And then they still lose the game. Like, it just, how many times have both of these teams been bitten in the ass by kickers? How many times have kickers just it's unbelievable. You can't, there's no real way to explain it, because it's like, how does this continue to happen to both of these teams? How have neither of these teams, with all the great players and the great seasons that they've had, how have neither of these teams just found a way to put it all together for one season? It's mind-boggling.
You didn't even mention the way that game against the Patriots ended, which was the Chargers intercepting the ball, which would have ended the game, and then fumbling it.
Yep.
which could also be this weekend. Like, I want to leave all doors open. I could definitely see Mekhi Blackman steps in front of a pass. He's running it back. He's Dion dancing. Dion's hot right now, and the ball flies out of his hands, and they lose the game. Could happen. Anything could happen. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited about this game for that reason because I enjoy the history. And before we talk about kind of like who's going to win, and another question I had for you about just the coaching of the Vikings in general, because I think Brandon Staley, if they lose this one, he might be getting a call from the office. It's time. It's been very ugly since they lost that playoff game, but it's even been really ugly for his defense the entire time. But I have to ask, as we go, as the Vikings face a team like this, who's your favorite Charger?
Oh,
And there are many to choose from.
yeah. Um, you know, you and I, we both have a strong love and affinity for 90s football, mid 90s football. I'm gonna go with Natron Means because I love me some 90s running backs, man. Especially like the big physical workhorse bell cow running backs. And Natron Means was kind of that guy, just a big, just physical, just monster of a running back. So yeah, I'll go with Natron Means.
Okay, I'm going to throw back a little bit far here to the most underrated wide receiver, maybe in NFL history. Wes Chandler was a mid
Mm,
80s wide receiver for them when Dan Fouts was the quarterback. And, it was just like downfield passing and stuff. There was a year he had like 40 catches for like 1,200 yards. I mean, it was crazy. He was such a great athlete. But that's going way back. When we're talking about the 90s, I mean, of course, you had Alfred Papuno, who is an unforgettable tight end. Stan Humphries throwing to him. They had some great defensive players. Let's say, I mean, Junior Seau, of course. Quentin Jammer a little bit later. I mean, this is a team. LaDainian Tomlinson is obviously going to be at the top of everybody's list for their favorite players. But I feel like in every era, they had a lot of great players that were fun. Even some wide receivers like Mark Say. Hey, a crossover Darren Bennett, the Australian punter, like one of the original Australian punters before all those Australian punters started to come in. And then one of the great fullbacks in history and the most underrated player on those teams, Lorenzo Neal, who
yeah,
was a massive, massive part of LaDainian Tomlinson's running game. So, and I mean, I don't know how you feel about Phillip Rivers. I really enjoyed Phillip Rivers. I mean, I thought
me
that
too.
especially early in his career with everything around him, he was as good as it got in the NFL, and a true elite quarterback. And then they went through that transition that was tough on their roster, and he had some 500 years. But it was really cool to see him have like a 12-win season for the Chargers, and then even go to Indianapolis. Do you think that he's going to make the Hall of Fame?
I think he should. I mean, he's got every passing record in franchise history, right? Just about. And the guy whose records that he broke, Dan Fouts, is in the Hall of Fame. So it's kind of like, no disrespect to Dan Fouts, but like, how does Phillip Rivers, and Phillip obviously played in more of a in an era of football where they were throwing the ball a lot more. I mean, Dan Fouts in a lot of ways was kind of ahead of his time playing in that Air Coryell offense. Uh, but it's just, I just think it would be kind of weird to see Phillip Rivers have all of those team records and not be in the Hall of Fame, and Dan Fouts is. And it's not, and you can't even say like, well, Dan Fouts, went to this Super Bowl, and that, because neither one of them got to a Super Bowl. So, I personally, I love Phillip Rivers too. Phillip Rivers was always kind of the guy. He was kind of like the other guy, viewed as the other guy in the Eli Manning trade, because Eli was kind of the consensus number one guy. He gets drafted by the Chargers, doesn't want to go there, and you know, there was kind of some pressure on Phillip Rivers to kind of live up to at least some sort of expectation, and he was able to do that. He was kind of the franchise guy for well over a decade. And he was just really good. And he was competitive. He was a trash talker. I mean, you ask a lot of defensive players, like, what was the quarterback that they hated the most? A lot of them say, well, Phillip Rivers, because he was always talking trash. He never shut up. And I kind of like that. I kind of like quarterbacks that have a little bit of an edge to them, that competitive drive, and so yeah, Philip Rivers was a lot of fun. He had kind of that quirky sort of shock put sidearm delivery too, but it worked for him, right? I mean, he still put up great numbers, won a fair amount of games. Yeah, he was fun, man.
So, by the Hall of Fame monitor on Pro Football Reference, Rivers has a very strong case. So, he is just below the mark of an average Hall of Fame quarterback. And his comparables are guys that you would expect. Matt Ryan, Ben Roethlisberger are the most similar scores to him. And then actually, Dan Fouts is very close to Philip Rivers. So, I think at least by the Hall of Fame monitor numbers, he should be pretty much a shoe-in for the Hall of Fame. He does have, of course, no championship, and he, oddly enough, was never first-team All-Pro, which is weird. But, in the AFC, how were you ever going to win a first-team All-Pro when you had Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and Ben Roethlisberger in your conference? So I think he was one of the most fun. And if people have been listening a long time, they've heard this story before. But if you haven't, I'll tell my one Philip Rivers story. So the Vikings are playing at the soccer stadium out there in Los Angeles, and it is a atrocity for Rivers. He has a horrible game. You remember this one in 2019.
Yep.
Terrible, terrible game. Bunch of interceptions. Vikings win running away. So the locker room is very small. So I kind of got in and got out. It was getting a little claustrophobic in there. And I'm standing in the hallway, just kind of just mingling, seeing if anybody comes out and maybe I can interview him in the hallway. And Philip Rivers comes up and stands kind of like right by me. And I didn't know like what he was doing. And he says to somebody who's a Viking security person, like, is Garrett Bradbury in there? They both went to NC State, not at the same time or anywhere close, but he obviously knew who Bradbury was. So Bradbury comes out. He's got to wait for kind of quite a while. It was actually a little awkward. We're just standing there like me and Philip Rivers. And so Bradbury comes out and he says, "Hey, did you get the jersey that I sent over for you? Good luck. Great to see you." All this after just getting smashed. I'm sure he wanted to go home to his 47 kids. And he was living, I think he was still living in San Diego. So we're talking like late afternoon. It's been a long day. It's been a really long day for that man. And then he had to wait like 10, 15 more minutes outside of the Vikings locker room just to shake Garrett Bradbury's hand, tell him good luck with your career. Congratulations on being a first round pick, and gave him a jersey. I just thought like that was really cool to see. And that's something no one would see. And I wouldn't have seen if I wasn't standing outside the locker room because I just got uncomfortable and had to walk outside. Like, so I thought that was really cool. So I always have a lot of respect for Philip Rivers because of that. Now, I referenced the coaching situation. These two gentlemen are from the McVay coaching tree. O'Connell is clearly in better standing than Brandon Staley. But how okay, so we know the Wilfs aren't going to fire coaches or anything, and there's no reason to have any sort of discussion like that with Kevin O'Connell. Overall, organizationally, it's going really well with Kevin O'Connell as the head coach. I think you've done as well as you can do in hiring him. But where do you stand on him, Manny? Because they started 8-1, they're 5-6 since. It's been sort of what we've always come to know over the last 11 games, which is almost it's like 3/4 of a season or whatever. So how you feeling? How you feeling about Coach O'Connell?
I'm still feeling pretty good. I think the way he stepped in last year, taking over for Mike Zimmer, and it was a team that we weren't really sure how they were going to handle having a new coach, especially a coach that in a lot of ways was a polar opposite from the guy that he replaced. And I think for him to be able to kind of rally that team together and find ways to win games the way they did last year. And, like we said last week, I mean, we're never going to see that again, that type of success that they had in one score games, winning 11 games like that. I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. I think what we've seen these first two games is this team kind of play the same way they did last year. They're just not we haven't seen that game-winning drive from Kirk Cousins that we saw a number of times last year. We didn't see that big interception or huge Justin Jefferson catch in a big moment that we saw so many times last year, and that's kind of why they're sitting in an 0-2 hole. I still feel pretty good about it. I would love to see this head coach identify a young quarterback and develop them, because I think ultimately that's going to be really kind of the determining factor of how good of a coach he is. You know what I mean? We know Kirk is good. It's we're going on 6 years here. I just want to see this head coach identify a young quarterback, draft him, develop him. If he has to sit for a year, that's fine. But I want to see a head coach that's an offensive guy, a former quarterback himself, coming from a system in which was very successful with Sean McVay. I want to see him get his own guy, and we'll see the Vikings kind of do something that I think you and I both have been clamoring for them to do for the last couple of years. Get a young quarterback, get yourself some cap flexibility, and go from there and try to like load up at other positions. And I think it feels like this year, if they can just kind of get through this year, not have it be a complete disaster, like not be like 3-14, I think that will at least keep the morale of the organization high. And then I think it'll still give them an opportunity to get a young quarterback and just kind of move on. Look, I mean, Kirk is who he is. I think they've gone about as far as they can go with him. It's just time to see this coach really go out and find his guy and see what he can do with that going forward.
So Mark's comment here is a little short on grammar, but and it's very blunt, but I also like it and I think I agree with it. So Mark says O'Connell isn't dumb, and I'm not believing that he's doing stupid stuff because he doesn't know what he's doing. And there's so many times, Manny, in our football enjoying lives together. How long have we known each other? Since 2016,
Yep.
where we've just said, this Matt Patricia guy, totally lost. Has no idea what he's doing. He's done. This Joe Judge guy, huh? Like, nope, I don't think so. Guy comes off like a lunatic. And you can get a vibe very quickly from when the coach, Nate Hackett, last year, it was like the first game, and Peyton Manning is tearing whatever he has left of his hair out because of the way that Nate Hackett is managing the game and his game plan. And it's like, yeah, that when you see it. When the coach is just doing dumb stuff constantly. And that has not been the case at all. And I also think that we were talking about Risner and why it's a good signing, because what? Passing is most important. Their passing game, when you watch it on tape, it makes so much sense. Your receivers are open. Guys have opportunities to make plays. I was just thinking about this today. What's the best catch Justin Jefferson's had all year? Hasn't really had to make one. He's actually been open. He's actually been schemed open, which is a great idea. And how many times, I mean, and all respect to Gary Kubiak and Kevin Stefanski, but and they schemed Diggs open with deep play actions and stuff. But how many times were we like, can't you just throw to this guy all the time? And Diggs was like, can't you just throw to me all the time? And Buffalo said, sure we can. And then the Vikings are doing the same thing with Jefferson. Can you just throw to him like every play? Sure you can. And the fact that they've found ways also to integrate the other receivers, everybody was good. Hawkinson had a touchdown. Addison had a touchdown. Osborne's touchdown is amazing to watch back on tape because everyone goes at Jefferson and Osborne just walks right by him, wide open for a touchdown. Like, they are scheming up some darn good stuff. And that to me is really, really important. And I don't know what he's supposed to do about a defense that's in transition. You got about the best defensive coordinator, best mind that you could get, but there's only so much you could do with the talent. Jonathan Bullard, Kyrus Tonga, like, these guys are just getting moved against Philadelphia. There wasn't a whole lot you could really scheme or do with that. So I think when you have a good and competent coach, you ride that train until that man makes you not keep him, right? Because I think we've seen that staying with coaches, even through some ups and downs and some bumps and good years and bad, is a better idea than overreacting and then trying to chase the next coach.
Yeah, and how many times have we seen other franchises, to your point about the coaching instability, so to speak, teams just recycling coaches every other year? I mean, we've seen the Giants do this now with Pat Shurmur, and then who was the guy that took over for Coughlin before Pat Shermer? I'm drawing a blank on who he is, but he was like the coach for like 2 years.
Oh, was it Ben McAdoo? Was it
Ben,
that, or is
yeah,
that the?
yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's Ben McAdoo, and then you got Pat Shermer, and then it's Joe Judge, and it's like how many coaches have the Giants had just in the last like 6 years? It's ridiculous. The Browns changing coaches every year, every other year. A lot of times that's those when those teams are bad and you keep changing the coach every other year, that's how you stay bad. You don't really give a guy a chance. Now, you have some instances like a Joe Judge, like a Matt Patricia, that they're pretty bad and you can tell like this is never going to get better, so you just move on. I understand that part of it too. Um, but if you find a guy, you identify a guy and he brings some stability, he starts implementing a culture that is a winning culture. um, you got to stick it out through with him. You can't just have these knee-jerk reactions. And the Wilfs, to your earlier point, the Wilfs have never been a team that, or they've never been an ownership group that makes knee-jerk reactions with head coaches. And hey, we're off to a 1-3 start. This guy's on the hot seat already. He just became our coach last year. Like, we've never really seen that in the now almost 19 years that the Wilfs have owned the Vikings. So that's important. And again, I keep going back to, let's see if this guy can do with a young quarterback, developing his guy into his system. You've got a really good group of weapons on offense. You've got two bookend tackles that are really, really good. And you're kind of piecing things together on the interior of the line. But you've got a guy now that has some stability there. So I like Kevin O'Connell a lot. The guy gives off a good vibe to me. You've obviously had some good interactions with him from covering the team. So overall, I mean, I know it's tough to kind of see this team be 0-2 and whatnot, but I think overall, when you look at the overall body of work, 20 games into this thing now, I think it's really solid. And I think people, until we start to see things really start to fall apart, and trust me, Vikings fans, we'll know. We'll know if it gets to that point because we've seen it before. I don't think we're anywhere near that right now. So I think the Vikings have a pretty good guy leading the way for them at the moment.
There's a phrase that I've never really liked, which is process over results. I'm sure you've heard this, right?
Yeah.
No, results are everything. So nothing over results. So if Kevin O'Connell just loses and loses and loses, then you will fire him because results are everything. But I think that the process, the saying should be something a little more along the lines of process will eventually equal results.
Yeah.
And I think with the process of having a great mind when it comes to passing concepts and a guy who can maximize the playmakers that he has and who can lead a locker room of veteran players or young players. He's had to do both now in these 2 years. And he can handle the pressure of doing this, I think. And we'll see because he might crack. I don't know. But they all do at some point. But you know what I mean? Like he seems, I think, even enough to not crack. So to me, I want to give that process a few years. I don't want to overreact on a weekly basis and say, well, he threw a tight end screen. Shouldn't we throw him out the door? Like, no, okay, that was a bad play call. And maybe like slip screens to CJ Ham. Just like, not like, no, let's not. If the play call does not say Jefferson, Hawkinson, Addison, possibly Osborne, just maybe don't even look at it. But aside from that, I want to give the process a while. I'll see through the roster reconstruction, see through, as you said, the quarterback situation and everything else. And then we'll kind of make that decision as long as it doesn't go crazy. But I think that you're talking about giving this years, not weeks, where Brandon Staley, you're talking about giving it weeks, not years for him. And I think that might be over soon if they don't really turn it around. Jamie asks, how many teams have made the playoffs since starting 0-3? So I just looked this up last night, and it's like 5 since 1980, and one of them was in Buffalo when I first started watching football as a youth. The 1998 Bills, Doug Flutie came in. So there's a throwback for you. It does not happen often. Oh, they call it Owen Tombstone because it's very hard to go 0-2 and still make the playoffs. The Vikings would have to go 9-6 to have a 50% chance. But you go 0-3, not with San Francisco and Kansas City coming up. 0-3 is going to be that's probably too much, even in this mediocre division. Speaking of too much, though, Manny, the Jets and Bears. Wow. Just
Yeah.
wow. There has been, we talk about how the Chargers and Vikings have these identities. Well, the Jets and Bears are the AFC NFC reflection of each other when it comes to great defenses, horrible quarterbacks, all their quarterbacks bust. I mean, which one of those teams' fan bases should be more distraught about their situation after what happened in the first 2 weeks of this year, the Bears or the Jets?
It's a great question. I'm gonna go with the Jets just because I think the Bears, I kind of feel like, all right, if Justin Fields just does not progress, if he just continues to just not be a very good passer, relying, way too much on his legs, and this offense doesn't really produce, because they did go in the offseason, they did go and get him some weapons. So you'd like to see him, especially going into year 3, you'd like to see him make kind of a jump. So far, it doesn't look like he's done that yet. But I think with the Bears, it kind of feels like, all right, if he doesn't really show much progress this year, that they can just kind of pivot. They've got some draft capital. If they go 4-13 or something like that this year, they're going to have some draft capital to be able to move up if they need to a couple of spots, and then go and get a Shedeur Sanders or a Drake May or something like that, or maybe even a Caleb Williams. Who knows? The Jets, man, they put everything into Aaron Rodgers. Everything. Like, he was going to be the missing piece. He was the difference between them being a 7-10 kind of a train wreck at quarterback with Zach Wilson to, oh my God, we got this Hall of Fame guy in, and we've got these young receivers, and he's bringing some of his buddies from Green Bay with him. We've got this rock star defense. We've got this young, energetic, positive-minded head coach. It's New York. This is it if you're a Jets fan. And then the guy pops his Achilles 4 plays into the season. And now you're stuck back with the guy that you've been lamenting about for the last 2 years. And then, you have this great win on Monday night against the Buffalo Bills, a hated division rival, and everybody's feeling pretty good. It's kind of a bittersweet thing because Aaron Rodgers is still done for the season. And then they go to Dallas yesterday, and it's like, yep, that's the Zach Wilson we've seen for the last couple of years. That's the same guy. Yeah, man. I think, if comparing the two fan bases, it kind of sucks to be both, but it feels like it sucks a little bit more to be a Jets fan right now.
Yeah, I think this is exactly right, because if you're looking at Chicago, so they had their chance with Trubisky, another quarterback that didn't work out, but they built this freakishly good roster. And that's how Trubisky was able to look like a decent player. But in 2018, that's a really good, complete football team. Fangio, all the defensive players, Khalil Mack, everything else. And so that comes apart, as all teams eventually do when they get old and expensive. And Ryan Poles tears it all the way down to the screws. Well, no one should ever think that the next year, after going 3-14 and a full, complete tear down tank rebuild situation, that you're going to be good. So, like, think about Detroit. Like, even they tore it down. They lost all the games except for the time they beat the Vikings. And then the following year, they took a step forward, but they were not a great team. And they had to start out, what was it, 1-6 last year? And then
Yep.
toward the end of the season, they're looking better. I don't know if that's going to happen with Chicago, but normally when it goes all the way down to the screws, Miami was like this. How many years since they tanked for Tua? That was like 3 years ago, right? 2000, no, it was like 19. So it was like 4 years ago where they tanked for Tua. And it took until really a little bit last year and then this year until they're a true contender. So it's usually 3 to 4 years that it takes to go all the way down to the bottom bottom, rebuild, go all the way back up. Even Cincinnati drafts this incredible quarterback. It still takes 2 years. And then I think that even their roster was stronger last year than it was when they went to the Super Bowl. So it usually takes a few seasons. So you could say, as Chicago, all right, well, we didn't, you shouldn't have been rational thinking this was going to be great, just not this horrible. And, also if it goes truly bad, then you draft another quarterback and you move on, and that's life. But for the Jets, you're right. I mean, this was 40 years of pain for them that was supposed to be alleviated by great quarterback play. And of course, they were a bit delusional because we all watched Aaron Rodgers last year, right? Even on the play he gets hurt, he wasn't getting rid of the ball, which was a huge issue for Aaron Rodgers the last couple of years. But still, to have all that build up, months and months and months and months of build up and hype and excitement, and then the dude just gets hurt on the first play. And then there's even this little flicker of, hey, what if Zach will? No. And the
Nope.
broadcast was trying so hard. They were like, he's learned from Rodgers, and you could see that footwork where it looks like what Rodgers would do. It's like, no,
Nope.
man, I don't think
Still the
so.
same guy.
I don't think it works that way. I don't think Scott Tolzien suddenly became better after playing behind Aaron Rodgers. I don't think it works that way. And boy, you want to talk about busts, Zach Wilson. That's the thing about both Fields and Wilson is both of them looked like really good prospects, and there was a lot of debates like which would you rather have, which type of quarterback, and both of them ended up not working out. So, Fields looks like he could occasionally win. Wilson looks like he just can't even play at all at this level. Like Fields maybe becomes Geno in 10 years or something, but I can't see that happening ever with Zach Wilson. All right. So we are deep into the show now, Manny, and we've had 2 full National Football League weeks. I don't know who's winning right now. I haven't been looking at the television. It looks like both games are pretty awful. The Saints are winning. They have 13-6 in the fourth quarter.
Yuck.
And the other game, somebody mentioned, I'm sorry, was it T. Kubler who mentioned the Browns should also be in this conversation for being distraught about their quarterback because Deshaun Watson stinks now. And I don't know if it's ever coming back. I don't know where it went, and I don't know if it's ever coming back. So it looks not too good. Anyhow, I want to know, after seeing a couple of weeks, assuming this is not going to change by tonight's matchups, who your top 5 clubs in the National Football League are.
This was actually tougher than I thought it was going to be when you first sent me the questions earlier today. Because there's one team that I'm leaving out that you kind of think on the surface, like, how could you leave this team out? But I'll get to that in a second. So I've got San Francisco number 1 right now. They've just looked really good. They demolished Pittsburgh week 1. They looked really good against the Rams yesterday in that neutral site game in Los Angeles against the Rams, even though it was probably about 60% Niners fans. They just look like, I had some questions about Brock Purdy, coming off of the injury in the NFC title game, and just kind of like, can he really repeat, what he did last year as a rookie? And, so far he's playing a lot like he did last year. He's not wowing us with, 300, 400 yard passing games or anything like that, but he's just been really steady. He's not turning the ball over, and they're leaning on that defense to kind of set the tone for them week in and week out. So I got the Niners number 1. I've got Dallas number 2 right now, just because they played the 2 New York teams the first 2 weeks of the season, and they just obliterated both of them. So they've kind of done what they should do. They're going up against 2 teams that they should beat, and they're taking care of business. Even though they didn't blow out New England last night, I was really impressed with Miami's ability to kind of just keep it together. Things weren't going great for them offensively. They were having a tough time kind of finishing drives and really kind of putting the Patriots away. And the Patriots deserve some credit for that, because that's a pretty formidable defense in New England. But the way the Dolphins kind of kept it together, the way they've kind of faced some adversity the first 2 weeks and they've come out on top, 2 games on the road winning like that, I think is really impressive. So I've got them at number 3. I like what Baltimore's doing right now, going on the road, beating Cincinnati. And The Bengals, I'm kind of wondering what's going on there because it sounds like Joe Burrow aggravated that calf in the game yesterday, and they just haven't. The Bengals have not looked good these first 2 weeks, so I'm a little worried about them. But Baltimore looks pretty good, and Lamar Jackson has weapons, and looks like that offensive line is holding up pretty good. And they seem to be holding it together. You lose your starting running back for the season, and it just kind of feels like John Harbaugh is still really good at just keeping that team together with the leadership and kind of the culture with that franchise. And then I've got Philadelphia number 5. The Eagles, I don't think the Eagles have looked great these first 2 weeks, but you can kind of see like, yeah, that's a team that went to the Super Bowl last year. Like they just know how to win. Jalen Hurts hasn't looked great, but he just the intangible leadership qualities that he brings to the table just allows them to find ways to win games. So that's my top 5. I got Kansas City kind of honorable mention just on the outside at number 6. Even though they have the greatest player in the world, it feels like offensively they're not quite clicking yet. They got Kelsey back yesterday, which was good. But they're just having a tough time. Feels like they're having a tough time finishing drives. They're moving the ball okay. Committed a lot of penalties yesterday in Jacksonville, which was kind of weird for an Andy Reid team. But I think eventually Kansas City is going to put it together. But right now they just look a little bit out of sync right now offensively. So that's my top 5.
I like this list. It's a very strong list. The thing about Kansas City, though, is there is a part of me that still wants to just put them number 1. And getting Chris Jones back and having him dominate the way that he did, having their defense, and they were helped by the inability to toe tap by the Jaguars. That's what they're going to do this week. Like how Kevin O'Connell's talked about. Yeah, we're going to practice ball security this week. Okay, I guess. But like they're going to be toe tapping like crazy on every sideline down in Jacksonville. After they would have scored at least 2 more touchdowns if they could just get into the end zone. But the first 2 weeks of Kansas City's defense have been good, and I just think that if Patrick Mahomes, no matter how many games he has to start a season in the middle of a season that don't go so stunningly well, where he's not just throwing for 450 yards or whatever, it's on the way. And if you're giving me him and his team versus any team in the NFL on a neutral site field, I will pick him to win. So I still, in a way, and they lost by, was it 1 point to Detroit because they dropped about 11 passes? Like I'm not moving Kansas City. I'm going to still put Kansas City as the best team in the NFL. I'm not overreacting to the first 2 weeks, even though that's kind of what I asked you to do, was overreact, but I will still have them as the best team in football until they prove to me that they're not. Did you hear, by the way, who could start for Cincinnati? Did you hear this? Do you know?
No, I don't even know who their backup is.
Dave Klingler. No, I'm just kidding. It is
Achilles Smith.
Achilles Smith. Former Minnesota Viking Jake Browning is apparently their number 2 quarterback. Yes, cut out of training camp for the Vikings. Most famous for a night practice after everybody else got COVID. So that is a tough spot for my Super Bowl pick, the Cincinnati Bengals. But yes, it is Jake Browning. So yeah, I think that Dallas belongs number 2, and I'll tell you why. Because I once heard Zach Lowe talk about how blowouts are maybe even more indicative of how strong a team is than close games against other good teams. So you might play San Francisco and lose by 3. Well, that's hard to say. Like, how good are you really? Well, you lost, so you must not be as good. Well, I don't know, right? But teams that blow other teams out are usually the strongest because the Jets have a lot of good players still, and they just destroyed them. So I'm going Dallas as my number 2 team. And yeah, people are going to say, and Jonathan's watching, so he's going to complain about McCarthy and everything else. But look at that roster. Look at that defense.
Loaded,
look
man.
at Brandon Cooks wasn't even playing. If he's playing, like, they got a lot of talent. So I'm going to go with Dallas as number 2. San Francisco is a great number 3 pick. I also had the Ravens as my number 4 team. They have looked great. But here is where I struggled, was the number 5 team. And I'm going to go with, once again, not overreacting. And Jonathan's already texting me angrily. Mike McCarthy, coach of the year. Jonathan, he hates him. He just cannot stand Mike McCarthy. He's doing a great job, though. I'm going to go Buffalo. I'm going to say that Buffalo is the fifth best team here because again, they should have won the game against the Jets. It was a very strange night. They made a lot of dumb mistakes. They had some interceptions on silly plays by Josh Allen the first week of the season, and they blew it. And they had a weird fumble snap or whatever. They just blew it. They blew a punt. Like, a lot of bad things happened to them. It was a kind of a random game. And then they came back to Buffalo and they just absolutely trounced the Raiders, as they should have. So I think that Kansas City and Buffalo, while they are 1-1 and not 2-0, are still two of the five strongest teams in the league. But the way that Dallas and San Francisco have just established themselves in these first couple of weeks has been extremely impressive. Now, can Kyle Shanahan keep a quarterback healthy would be my question, because he says some kind of tendency to wound them. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's what's going to happen. If Brock Purdy gets injured or something, Sam Darnold's going to come in and just start throwing darts, because that's just what Kyle Shanahan does. Like, he just takes these guys, Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy and some of these other guys, even like Nick Mullins came in and like won a game for him as a backup a couple of years ago. Like, Kyle Shanahan just finds a way, man. It just, whatever, it goes back to what you're talking about with just like what the Vikings are doing with Justin Jefferson. Kyle Shanahan's so good at just like scheming these guys open, scheming George Kittle open, scheming Brandon Ayuk open, just finding all sorts of ways for Deebo Samuel to just be just a beast, a playmaker, just to make things happen. And it almost doesn't matter who he has playing at quarterback. It's they're the way they're rolling right now, man. And that defense is still really good. The Niners are fun, man. I just it's kind of, we always talk about how most of the teams that win Super Bowls, they have that elite, top 4, top 5-ish quarterback more often than not. But if we see the Niners go back to the Super Bowl again with like Brock Purdy or like Sam Darnold, it's like only Kyle Shanahan could pull off something like that.
It's going to be like Matt Hasselbeck, kind of like a
Yeah.
quarterback that nobody really thought of, and then comes in and has this great team, great coaching, and everything else. Can I just ask one more thing before we wrap up? Just a small statement, just a
Sure.
request to all content creators, major media people. Just a small thing. Stop trying to trade the Vikings to people. It's been 2 weeks. Stop trying to trade Jefferson for 3 draft picks. It will never happen. That is never going to happen. I guess you can old takes expose me if it does sometime. Stop trying to trade Jefferson. Stop trying to trade Kirk to the Jets. It's just probably not going to happen. I don't want to completely count it out, but it's probably not. I mean, just stop it. Like, stop it until you have to. Okay, trade deadline maybe. I just can't see any of this stuff happening where we're trading like Kirk to the Jets, or especially the Justin Jefferson. Just stop with what if they trade him for 2 firsts and whatever? Like, what? You already, as a franchise, have the worst trade in NFL history. Would you like the second worst trade as well? That's what it is if you trade away Justin Jefferson.
How
Yeesh.
if hypothetically, if the Vikings were to trade Kirk to the Jets, how would they even make the money work? Because aren't the Jets up against the cap too, with like Rodgers and his deal, and like how do you just have like 2 $40 million quarterbacks on your roster? Like, how do people think that that's even going to work?
The only way, and I don't know how this works exactly, if it could happen, the only way would be if the Vikings took the cap space back for extra compensation. And I guess, I don't know, like, are the Jets trading a first in the middle of the season? That would seem completely insane. So the Jets don't have enough cap space to afford Kirk, but maybe there's a way that the Vikings can keep most of that for extra compensation for draft picks. I don't know. It really depends on how desperate the Jets are. I mean, it should be pretty damn desperate, because they're going to win like 4 games with Zach Wilson in like a top 3 roster. It did happen, as you mentioned, with Nick Mullins, but it's just I think more silly. Well, it's all silly right now until there's any sort of evidence that it could happen. But more silly is Jefferson didn't sign his contract, trade him to whoever. Like, okay, look, most players don't sign their contracts until the last year of their rookie deals. That's just how it works. So it's not even that unusual. It's not like you're back up against the wall and it's time to trade him. I mean, maybe we would have that discussion like 3 days before the season. Manny, did your camera just go out? Where did you go?
Yeah, my camera just went kaput,
Okay.
and
Okay.
I'm gonna
Well, you
make a
looked great
little.
though. You look great tonight. Well, we're good. We're wrapping up anyway, but I just thought I was like, okay, maybe Manny does want to trade him. I don't know.
It's a different camera than what I normally use. I'm using an external camera, and I guess it just decided to unplug, and now it doesn't want to come back on, which is unfortunate. But I guess I'll be like a gray egghead for the last minute or so of the show.
Well, everyone can focus on your beautiful vocal tones. So, all right. Well, thanks, Manny, as always. Thanks for everybody for watching and playing along. And we'll have a lot here on the channel going on this week. I mean, Jeremiah Searles breaking down Dalton Risner. What a time to have an offensive lineman in our corner. And we'll have a ton of Chargers perspective as well, because I just happened. Oh, there you are. Because I
I'm back.
happen to know people who cover the Chargers. So there's going to be like 3 Chargers guests. Lots going on. This is a big game, everybody. It's a huge game, and I'm excited to lead up to it as well. And also the return of the Thursday roundtable with Will Ragatz and Andrew Kramer. I mean, there is just content coming out of your ears. So keep it locked on here, and we will talk to you all soon. Football